Well, hey there, I'm Amanda Day, a grant professional certified. I am a grant consultant and trainer and have been doing the consulting gig since 2015. Oh, like everybody, I fell into it. I graduated with a degree in communications and psychology with every intention of going to grad school to become a psychologist. um, and took a year or two off to save some money and went to a temp agency where I landed a job as an administrative assistant for a small city just south of Atlanta, Georgia. It was the city of Morrow. So I was the administrative assistant for the city manager there and had been there about 6 months when we had a police officer who had been really good at getting grants, and the city manager asked her if she would write more grants for the city. And her answer was, sure, but I'm a patrol officer, so I don't have a whole lot of time. And so he said, hey, let me introduce you to Amanda. She's new here. She's really good at writing. And so I did. I helped Officer Lynn for several months, got to learn quite a bit from her. But about 6 months later, she took a new job. And when she left, the city manager was like, hey, Officer Lynn did a good job bringing in some money just part time. Can you imagine how successful our community would be if we had somebody full time researching the grants and then writing them and then managing them when we got them? Because I know there's all kinds of crazy rules. And I said, Boss, I think you're onto something. And he said, I'm so glad you agree. Congratulations. You're my grants administrator. So that's how I fell into the role. And I took it thinking I'll do this for a year or two, but then I'm going back to grad school. And here I am 21 years later, still writing grants. Honestly, initially it was just kind of a sort of a victim of circumstance. I had been doing the grants for about a year, and at the time I got gotten engaged, and so then it was kind of like, well, I'm planning a wedding, I can't go back to school, and then it was, well, I'm just married. Do I really want to try to juggle work and school? And then my first child was on his way, and so at first it was kind of it just kept pushing it off because life was happening. But after a while, I was like, I'm really good at this. I really like it. And just decided I didn't want to change. So I like the good I can do. That's partly a big reason I wanted to be a psychologist was to help people. And in grants, you're doing that on such a huge scale. So I was able to fill that need without having to change careers. I'd say certainly the best part is seeing projects come to fruition. There's nothing like whether it's there's a physician's care clinic I do some writing for that they serve individuals without health care, without insurance. And so being able to go to the clinic and see these folks getting the primary care and the specialty care that they need is really neat. I've done some really big infrastructure projects in a city I used to work for. In fact, there's this one bridge. It was like a $12 million project. It was multiple grants, multiple community partners. That's probably my pinnacle of my proudest thing. And every time we drive on that highway and we go under that huge, and it's a beautiful bridge too, stacked stone and lots of pedestrian elements. And I always tell my kids, look, it's my bridge. And they're like, we know, Mom, you tell us every time. But it's just so cool to see like the hard work you put in that coming from words on a page to turning into something. So that's certainly the neatest part. The thing I really like about consulting is that I get to choose what I do. Part of why I made the switch from full-time employment to consulting is just to be able to balance family life. So I like that I can take as much or as little work as I want to based on my current family needs. So, um, probably in my role as consulting, is a lot of people are surprised that I don't advertise. Like I do not have a website. I don't have a business card. I'm not listed on any consultant directories. And that wasn't my initial intent when I first made the switch from being employed to consulting. That was on my to-do list. Like the first year, I'm going to have to set up a business. I'm going to have to do all these things, right? But as soon as people learned that I was consulting, people I had interacted with in my previous job, I was starting to get phone calls. And so I was getting work. So I thought, well, I'll wait. And it just kind of through word of mouth and all that stuff, I've never had to set up. Like I still just do business as an individual, just Amanda Day. I don't even have a company. I'm sure for tax purposes, there's probably a better way to do it. I just haven't sat down and taken the time to figure that out yet because I get enough work that way. So I think a lot of people are surprised. And that's something I like to share too. Like you see some of these other consultants that have these big powerhouse businesses and they're amazing and I'm in awe of folks that do that, but it's not the only route. So I do always like to share with people, like if you just kind of want to be a one-stop shop, small, it's very possible to do it that way. So when I first got told I was a grants administrator, one of the deals I made with my city manager, I was like, okay, if you're going to make me do this, I get some training. And so this would have been back in 2001. And so I'm looking online, trying to find some things. And I found a couple of courses. I took the Grant Writing USA 2-day grant writing course. And then I also took the Grantsmanship Center's 5-day writing course. Now, 20 years have passed since then. There are so many other courses. Those two still exist, and they're definitely good ones to consider. But there's so many courses now. And so I find myself constantly trying to take different webinars and conferences. And probably the best thing for my career in 2005, I discovered the Grant Professionals Association. Good for many reasons. One, just the annual conference is something I try to never miss because I learn so much from so many different people. Um, but also the people you meet, both at the national level and through your local chapters. I belong to the Georgia chapter. And getting to meet other grant professionals in your area really, really help make you so much better at the work you're doing. And so it's, I mean, for me, if I can't find what I'm looking for, my first thing is reaching out to other people, asking either, do you know, or do you know where I can get some training and things like that. So, and probably my proudest as far as, education and training goes is the GPC. I set for the Grant Professional Certified exam the first time it was offered back in 2007, and have maintained it every 3 years since then. It's something I don't want to let go of. I just had a brand new client yesterday. I sat in on kind of an interview with them to see if they were interested. And that was the very first thing they asked. They're like, we see these letters behind your name on your resume. What does that mean? What does that stand for? And so to be able to tell them what it is and how, there's only around 400 of us right now that have it. And they were like, wow, so you're like one of a few. And I'm like, yeah, I am. So certainly something I'm very proud of. I think something people often overlook, we always are looking at formalized training and formalized processes and education, which are great. But I think one of the best things you can do is to get to know other grant professionals. Talk to, if you want to be a consultant, well, then find some consultants and start talking to them about how they got to where they are. Um, and so, and to be able to learn from some of those different folks. Um, One of the things I found now too, it's not just I know how to write grants now, but there are still some things that as a grant professional, you sometimes need to be good at social media, which means you may have to be able to create images to be able to put online. So I'm like, I didn't go to school for that. I don't know anything about that. Well, I happen offhandedly mention it to somebody that, oh my gosh, I love on Twitter, you have the most gorgeous images. Who does that for you? And she's like, I do it myself. And I was like, how? And she's like, oh, I use Canva. And I was like, okay. And so then this was Jonna Rogers, and Jonna was like, I'll sit down with you. So she sat down with me at a conference one year. We took an hour off, and for an hour, she told me how to use Canva, and I can use it now because of her. And so I think just you need to figure out where it is you want to go and figure out who are the people that have those skills and just start asking them. I found the grant profession to be full of such kind and helpful people that most of them are willing, they've done it before and they're willing to help pull you along so you don't have to start from scratch. Yeah, I've never had a formal mentor, like someone we've sat down and said, officially, you're my mentor. But kind of like what I was mentioning earlier, there are certainly people that whether they've, helped me through with some specific things I needed, or whether they were just kind of my go-to people for a while. When I told you I started at the city of Morrow when I moved to the city of Alpharetta. So I'd only been writing grants for about 2 years when I switched to a much larger city to work for. And the grant writer who worked at the neighboring city was a guy named Danny Blitch. And Danny calls me my first week in office and was like, "Hey, I'm so glad you're here. There's another government grant writer in the area. We're having lunch. Where do you want to meet?" And so he and I met. I happened to know the girl who took my place in Morrow was Sylvia Reddick, and Danny knew another girl named Robin Bishop. And so the four of us were all writing grants in the metro Atlanta area for local governments. And so we started meeting once a month. We informally called ourselves the Georgia Government Grant Writers Association. Like we called ourselves G3WA, but really there was nothing formal about it other than once a month we met for lunch. It was usually a 2 to 3 hour lunch because we'd be like, what are you working on? What are you struggling with? And so that was definitely a peer mentoring group that I worked with probably for about 2 years. We did that until we discovered the Georgia GPA chapter, and then started going there where I met a whole bunch of other folks. But definitely just my biggest mentoring has just been people along the way that I can call for advice and are always willing to lend a hand. And there's, like I said, there's so many of them in the field. I have done the GPA mentor program as a mentor. Once went through a whole year with a young lady who is doing really great in the profession now. And so even though you would say, oh, well, you weren't the mentee, you didn't get anything out of it, I still learn from the process. And plus, it's always like, you kind of, when they're doing good, you kind of feel proud, like I helped shape that. And so it's certainly something I plan to do again. It's just trying to balance all the other stuff I'm doing at the moment. I would say the great thing about grants is that it is so varied, right? For a long time, all I did was I wrote federal grants mostly for local governments. And so when I started consulting, I assumed that would probably be my bread and butter. And I certainly still work in that field, but I've started taking on some clients in the nonprofit field. I just signed a new client in the hospital arena. And I'll be honest, I have never written a grant for a hospital before, but I know I've got the skills to do it because I understand how grant writing works. Also, I know a couple of people who write grants for hospitals, and I had a conversation with one last week, and I have a conversation this afternoon with another one, so they can give me the inside scoop of the things that I don't know. So I'd say that, if you're getting bored or if you're getting stuck in a rut, don't feel like, oh, well, I've only written this type of grant before, so there's nothing else I can do. You can jump ship and try something totally different. The rules of grant writing is pretty much the same across the board. It's really just figuring out that niche and those buzzwords that differ from kind of field to field. But it's it's a great profession. I mean, local governments need grant writers, nonprofits need them, hospitals, universities, and you can certainly consult too. So kind of the sky's the limit, and there's all kinds of fun stuff you can do with it. One of the ways that I've to keep myself excited about the career is a couple of years ago, my friend Kimberly Hayes Day Muga and I were kind of talking about how we've been doing this a while, we feel stuck in a rut, and we ended up starting a podcast together to remind ourselves about why we love this profession so much.